So I just saw Spider-Boy No Place Like Home, and I really liked it. Now this may not be a huge big surprise, but I like Spider-Man. Hell, I even like when Spider-Man isn't very good. I just like everything Spider-Man related. But that isn't to say I give every Spider-Man movie a pass. You guys know nothing is sacred here. So when I say I like this movie, I really mean it. Honestly, I really like this movie. Oh, and by the way, this is going to be spoiler-free until like the end where I warn you guys like I always do. You know how it works. Now, honestly, it's really hard to top Spider-Verse. I mean, Spider-Verse is the best Spider-Man movie. It's not even a question. And after seeing it, I was like, yeah, I don't really need to watch Far From Home because it will not be as good as Spider-Verse. And I wasn't really being fair because they're movies that serve completely different roles. Spider-Verse is a love letter to the character that can stand alone as its own thing. Far From Home is the continuation of an ongoing saga. They are not the same in any way other than the fact that they star a character named Peter. Far From Home is perfectly fine on its own because it ain't the same and it isn't trying to be. It's a very comedic movie for a majority of the runtime, but surprisingly enough, it does feel darker than Homecoming. A lot of people complain about how Homecoming doesn't have real stakes because people don't die. And if those people say this movie has no stakes or consequence, I will rip off my nose and put it back on upside down. Now, this movie is mostly about Peter wrestling with not being able to get what he wants because he has a job to do, which is pretty standard Spider-Man stuff, and it's done really well here. Up until this point in the MCU, Peter has only done whatever he's told to do. He hasn't gotten to make any choices for himself, and this movie is very much about him stepping out of the shadow of Tony and the other Avengers. I understand that Tony's role in the MCU is bigger than any other Marvel universe, but I personally don't want him to be so closely connected to Spider-Man because I want Spider-Man to be his own thing. This movie is all about how Peter pushes past this and becomes a more independent hero. Another thing I was over the moon absolutely pleased with is how they handled the events of Endgame. As expected, the time skip is addressed and promptly made fun of. If you're wondering about the horrifying existential implications of the snap, well, this movie does offer a lot of insight into it. It's not something that the characters just brush off as if it's insignificant. It's a pretty big deal, and this movie addresses it. Like, yeah, if this happened in real life, it'd be pretty sad and messed up, but in this universe, I'm okay with it being treated like a joke. Endgame is a very emotional movie. It's dark, and it is sad, and this movie does not need to carry that energy. It doesn't diminish the events of that film if we laugh at it now. If this movie began with sad shit right after Endgame ends with sad shit, it would not have worked. Audiences need a palate cleanser, and Spider-Man is perfect for that. It's refreshing to be able to laugh at the events of Endgame because if we're being honest, why wouldn't we? The things that happened in that movie were fucking crazy, and starting this movie with comedy is pure genius. After that, the rest of this first act is mostly low-key high school rom-com stuff. And yeah, that might sound bad, but it's not. I enjoy the idea of Spider-Man movies having more slice-of-life elements than the other Marvel films. Some people say the movie doesn't really pick up until Mysterio shows up, but I disagree. I was really into this little cute high school shit that they're doing. We should be seeing a lot of Peter outside of the suit to establish his environment and the people he spends his time with. But anyway, that's all I can talk about without getting into spoilers, so here's your warning. I am not gonna wait any longer. Alright, let's go. So it goes without saying that Jake Gyllenhaal is one of the best things in this movie. I love his portrayal of Quentin Beck, and I think he's the most accurate Spider-Man villain we've gotten since, like, the Green Goblin. And before the Raimi fanboys go crazy, I think Otto Octavius is good in that movie, but he doesn't really represent what the character is to me as a comic book fan. To me, Spider-Man villains need to be spiteful, evil nerds who either want to kill Peter or ruin his life. And Mysterio fits that perfectly. He's actually pretty vicious, and he genuinely wants to kill Peter Parker and anybody who stands in the way of his goals. Innocent people die in this movie, and Peter just has to face the fact that he has to do something about it. There ain't no more Avengers around, so Peter's forced to deal with this stuff on his own. As a whole, Mysterio just felt more like a traditional Spider-Man villain, and that's exactly the kind of stuff that I think the movies need. I should also say that I really like Zendaya in this movie. I was kinda meh on her performance in the last movie. I wasn't really a fan of how edgy this character is, but she wasn't in the movie that much, so I didn't really think about it. In this movie, she comes across as more of a socially awkward, cute teenager that bounces well off of Peter. Their chemistry is really good too, and if it wasn't, this whole series would be ruined, not just this one movie. In this whole movie, you really do want to see them get together, and for most Spider-Man fans out there, that's a really important thing to get right. However, the movie does have stuff that I thought was kind of weird that I would have preferred to be different. For one thing, this movie has some god-awful ADR. There are moments where a character will mouth something completely different than what they actually say. It just pulls me out of the movie really hard. The last thing that bothered me is the plot device of Peter's spider sense not working. This has been a thing in other movies and comics, so I don't mind the actual plot point itself, but the thing is that it's not really brought up until the end of the movie. Peter doesn't dodge this banana that Aunt May throws at him at the beginning of the movie, and then the rest of the movie passes by, and then right at the end they tell us that his spider sense hasn't been working. That's like a really big deal, and it feels like the movie just forgot to tell us. But anyway, despite those things, I was perfectly fine with this movie. I had to see it a second time just to make sure I got everything, but honestly, this movie is so solid and so fun. And I should mention that it has probably my favorite mid-credit scene in any MCU movie. To me, the mid-credit scenes should be like little comic book teasers to show you what's in store for the next issue. And this is exactly what this one is like. It feels like a perfect Spider-Man comic book cliffhanger. I almost expected a little text bubble at the end saying, "Uh-oh, webheads, how will Spidey get out of this one?" I love stories where Peter gets framed and has the whole city against him. It's such a staple of Spider-Man storytelling, and it's something we haven't gotten in a movie yet. I'm just really excited to see where it goes in the next movie, and that's really the biggest takeaway here. I just want more Spider-Man movies now, and after my Endgame review where I said I'm emotionally done with the MCU, that is high praise coming from me. I may be a little hesitant about the rest of the MCU, but I'm never going to turn down a Spider-Man movie. So anyway, we have to rate this movie now, and I'm going to go ahead and tell you guys something that most movie review channels are afraid to say. My previous scores are like a little inaccurate. Honestly, I think most of my MCU rankings would probably go down like one number score. I've always sung the praises of Homecoming, but honestly, I think I'd bump it down a notch too. I still like it, but I don't know, I just don't really feel like I need it anymore. We have all this new great Spider-Man media, and it's kind of just fallen by the wayside for me. So I'm going to change Homecoming to an 8 out of 10, and break my personal rule by giving Far From Home a half number in its score. Don't expect this to be a common thing though, because I usually don't really like doing it. So I'm giving Toy Story 3 Far From Home a solid 8.5 out of 10.